Hello, welcome everyone. I'm excited to be joined today with our oh, hello. Hello, welcome everyone. I'm excited to be joined today by Kathryn Mecrow-Flynn for this session titled Magnify Mentoring: Successes, Challenges, and Lessons So Far. I'm Allison Agnello, and I'll be the MC for this session. Following Kathryn's presentation, we'll have time for some Q&A where she will respond to your questions. So if you have any, please submit them through the Swap Card Live discussion feature. So now I will introduce our speaker, Kathryn. She is the founder and CEO of Magnify Mentoring, a charity dedicated to supporting people through mentorship, recruitment, and training people from underrepresented groups. Kathryn provides consultancy on hiring, fundraising, and evidence-based donation strategies, and she is currently focusing her efforts on disaster prevention and response organizations. Her career in civil society spans 5 countries, encompassing human rights litigation, legal research, and lecturing. So, welcome, Kathryn.
Thank you so much, Alison. And yeah, it's so great to be here today. This is actually my second EAGxVirtual, and yeah, they always bring me a ton of joy seeing people join from all over the world. Okay, so during the course of my presentation today, I'm going to talk about Magnify Mentoring. So what work we do, some successes, and also some of our challenges and key lessons learned. Because yeah, this is the first organization that I've ever started. So, we've learned some lessons along the way that I'll share with you all today. And then I'm also going to talk a bit more about some strategies that we found particularly helpful for supporting people from underrepresented groups. Awesome. So, a little bit about me and my career so far. So, as Alison mentioned, I graduated in law, specifically wanting to do human rights and international development. And I got my postgraduate in international law and human rights. So, from that, I worked in Bangladesh, Malaysia, India. And with that, I was really doing public interest litigation cases. So you're bringing cases that you think can further, the rights of people within particular areas. So one of the cases that I brought was on adequate housing and slums, and what the government can provide in order to make people's lives better in that context. So yeah, from there I moved to lecturing in international law and human rights at Jimma University in Ethiopia. And it was really there that I found out that I just really love like doing pastoral care style work. So I had, a body of students who I was lecturing to, and then I also was the gender focal person for that university. So yeah, at that point, I moved back to the UK and started working with first the Future of Humanity Institute and then the Centre for Effective Altruism, and eventually ended up working with the Life You Can Save, doing philanthropic outreach, and started Magnify Mentoring then. So yeah, a little bit about Magnify Mentoring. So we started back in 2019. The reason why we started, or why, I decided to like focus on this particular intervention is because I had sort of seen and experienced firsthand that I thought that we were missing really talented people, particularly people from underrepresented groups who would have been really well placed on working on, making the world better, and, dedicating their careers to evidence-based efforts to really tackle, big problems that affect a lot of people and are very serious. And I sort of had seen examples of people coming into these spaces and being like, I just don't think this is for me, and then leaving. And then also to an extent, people failing to recognize the merit of people as they were entering into spaces. So yeah, I sort of was really excited to work out how can we support women, non-binary and trans people specifically. And so I was looking at evidence-based initiatives for how we can go about doing this. And during actually an EAG back in, I think, 2019, I think in London, mentorship was suggested. So I'd never sort of set out wanting to like start a mentorship organization, but, the evidence base was much stronger for this particular intervention than it was for others that were targeted at improving the careers and lives, and support for people from underrepresented groups. So yeah, that was originally called Wham Bam, and now Magnify Mentoring. So, our mission is we support, inspire, and connect a global community of people from underrepresented groups who are motivated to have a positive impact with their career and lives. So, since 2019, we've grown from a network of over 500 community members spanning 35 countries and all inhabited continents. So, we initially started off, with 40 mentors who were really, my friends and my, fellow people who we knew in the network of who were excited to do this. And we really have grown from there to, a much broader network. So breaking that down, exactly what do we do? So the first thing that we do is we provide mentorship. So we have now 250 mentors from a diversity of different organizations, all of whom are working out how we can apply evidence-based interventions to reduce suffering in the world or prevent it ideally before it happens. We have 250 people who serve in that capacity with the organization from many different organizations and all across the world. So once every 3 months or so, I will receive applications for mentees, and I will then go through and I will match the mentees with a mentor. And on average, they meet once per month for 6 months. And, we've prepared resources around that, like mentor guidance sheets, mentee guidance sheets, and then some discussion points. The second thing that we do, which I'll get to that with lessons learned, but I radically underestimated the importance of, was community. So we try and create, and we have created a series of really warm, welcoming, kind, mutually supportive communities who can help one another when they're experiencing challenges, connect people to support and guidance and resources that are outside of my and our particular remit. And so concretely, we have an active Slack community. We do a number of different networking events throughout the course of each round. The third thing that we do is training. So it's an area actually that I'm really excited to beef. Oh, tofu up over the next 6 months or so. But we've started looking at, how can we provide training to people to get in front of problems? So if we know that our particular target demographic really struggle with, for example, confidence, can we actually get ahead of this and provide trainings to help them with these issues and with these, we're removing these potential barriers. So recently we did a goal setting workshop, where we went through how can we set effective goals and monitor our progress against those goals over the course of the mentorship program. And then the next bit that we look at is increasingly outreach. So how can we make sure that we're reaching people who wouldn't otherwise have been reached? How can we look at evidence-based communities, from all different kinds of approaches and different kinds of focuses. So we're really looking at how we can sort of strengthen that as well. And then the fifth is recruitment. Like we have a lot of people who are looking for work. We have people who are keen to connect with people who are looking for work. So this is something that's like my primary focus, which is I'm really looking at how can we make sure that we are helping people from underrepresented groups to get into and succeed in really impactful roles. So successes so far, I think the first thing is that we've built a really strong global network. So, we have a large number of mentors in many different interest communities, which is something that I'm really proud of and really pleased that we've managed to sort of build. And, again, a huge shout out to our mentors, because we would not be able to do what we do without them. And then we seem to be reaching people who we wouldn't otherwise have reached. So I think something that I feel really strongly about is, in my opinion, this kind of work is most effective when you're extending outside of people who would have otherwise been reached. So if we know that, the EA forum, or a specific type of newsletter is already reaching, X number of people, how can we extend beyond that and bring people or get people excited about evidence-based interventions to make the world better, who maybe wouldn't otherwise have been reached out to previously. So that seems to be something that we're having a lot of success with. Now 40% of our new mentees and mentors come from referral. So somebody said, I had a great experience with this particular program. This is something you should really try. And so 40% of our new mentees come from recommendation, which I think is a really good sign that we're sort of reaching out a little bit more past, who we may otherwise have been able to get in touch with. So this is a map of where our mentees and mentors are represented. Really is all over the world now, which is fantastic. At some point, I need to go through and do a bit more of an ingrained map of like different regions, because at the second we've got like one pin for the States, but yeah, so this is something that's really, really important to me and to our organization, which is in order to be able to make really ambitious changes in the world, we just really strongly believe that you need to be able to access expertise and global expertise. And it's been something that has been incredible to watch with Magnify, which is, we've managed to get in touch with mentors and mentees who are doing things that I just never would have thought of, so for example, one of our mentors has found a taxation loop. Don't ask me too many questions about this because I do not know in detail, but a taxation loop in Uganda that for some reason, basically has had tremendous impact with regards to household income. So that is sort of an example of something, that we wouldn't otherwise have known. And they're just things like this and points of leverage, that I think are really valuable. And I'm really excited to be able to support people on a global network or from a global network. So far, the feedback on Magnify is very positive. So in the post-round feedback form, the average for I recommend being a Magnify mentee was 9.4 out of 10. Much more important to me, and I think to the program and looking at actually how it's doing, is outcomes. So what are we achieving through the programs that we are running? So the first thing that we are achieving is providing advice, guidance, and resources on achieving goals. So essentially what we're looking at is, and this is actually maybe a little bit too inside of baseball, but essentially something that I've really learned is that I thought at the beginning of Magnify that actually what would work best would be connecting a junior member with somebody who was in the same career as them or the same interest area as them, and then sort of accordingly adjusting the match that way. So basically kind of, you want to go into this particular career, so we'll match you with somebody who's already in it. It turns out actually that isn't, from my experience, the most effective way to do this. The more effective way to do this is to ask the mentee what their goals are, and then ask the mentor what support they're interested in providing and match accordingly. And then to see whether or not the mentee reports that they've made progress against these goals. So we're really looking, at finding people whose goals we really strongly endorse and think are really positive and really robust and good for the world, and helping connect them with advice, guidance, and resources on how to achieve those goals. The other thing that we do is, which is really concrete and which is something that we really carefully track, is are we actually connecting and supporting people to opportunities? So chiefly jobs, funding, are we able to encourage people to apply for roles, to give them guidance throughout the application process, to connect them with jobs that they may not have otherwise known existed, and the same with funding. So something that I've really noticed, and actually maybe an advice for a lesson learned, is that one of the most impactful things that we do, and certainly one of the most cost-effective things that we do, is actually just to get on the phone with people who have really solid resumes and really solid CVs and have low confidence. So they express in their application that they're worried about applying to something because they think they might not be a good fit. And it's that sort of imposter syndrome of like, am I good enough? Could I possibly apply for this? I'm sure there's so many other people who are way better than I am who will apply. And just getting on the phone with them and being like, hey, look, you've got a fantastic resume. You should apply for this role, and then touching base with them in a couple of weeks and be like, did you apply for this role? And we've just had a significant amount of success in doing that, which, is very, very, very time light, and has surprised me with how much impact it has had with regards to actually getting people to apply for things. And then a lot of the time, or many cases, they've actually been successful in securing those roles. So the other thing is confidence building. So as I mentioned, having a mentor, having a community who you can talk to and who you can confide in when stuff is difficult or where you're facing challenges or barriers. I try and just be really honest about my own sort of struggles with, confidence, imposter syndrome, all of these things, because it's normal. Like a lot of people have these issues. issues. And I've noticed particularly people from underrepresented groups have these issues. So I'm very, very keen on really emphasizing to people like you can absolutely do this and creating communities that sort of mutually support one another. And then specific guidance. So like when I first started out in my career, I didn't know how to write a good resume. Like I'm from a like a background, socioeconomically where, I didn't have access to those resources. So, how do you write a good network resume? How do you network? Like these are specific skills, that I think are things that I've really personally had to practice and have had to like rely on support, to help me work out how to do this. So that has been something that I've been really keen on, like, can I help people with regards to just really practical skills that they may not otherwise have known. Um, and then, yeah, a welcoming community. So I think like something that I think is sometimes underestimated a bit is like, does your interaction with the community make you feel good? Do you feel warm? Do you feel welcomed? And I think, something that we put a lot of emphasis on with Magnify is, how do we build this and how do we strengthen this for people? And that has been very, yeah, just really, really warming to see, as people reporting that this community has just been really good for them. Great. So key lessons learned. Like founding organizations and like running them is hard. And I think that's sort of something that is just like really worth being quite upfront about. Like I definitely find my role quite hard and quite challenging. And sometimes it's fantastic, and sometimes you're like, oh man, this is hard work. But yeah, so there have been some really things that have really helped me. So I think the first thing is get really good advisors. So like at the very beginning of Magnify and throughout, we have really lent upon the support and expertise of fantastic people. Like, uh, Kerrick, for example, who like did a lot of our matching with regards to long-termism and helped with regards to that. Kathryn Lowe, who was really, really instrumental, and our board of directors in, getting advice. And so that was really important at the beginning of our program when it was more informal, but as the program formalized, I've sort of got a board of advisors who I really go to, and I've tried to sort of cultivate, like a really like knowledgeable, geographically diverse board of advisors who can give me advice, like when I am extending into different, regions, for example, when we're advertising heavily in different regions, how can we ensure that actually, regardless of what region, a mentee applies for, are we giving them as good advice as we possibly could be giving? Are we aware of the context? Are we aware of local organizations, impactful regional organizations? So that is something that I think is really important. The other thing that I found is just getting really good familiarity with your target community and issues before you leap in. Like Magnify serves a lot of distinct communities now. We have expanded our reach, more broadly to underrepresented groups past just women, non-binary and trans people of all genders. And that recently we've done a pilot round for people, for example, from low to middle income countries, low to middle income households, people who are outside of like traditional hubs, if you will. So how are we making sure that we are aware of some of the issues that these particular groups face? And again, that is really getting good advisors. It's also just personal familiarity. Like I really keenly know some of the problems that our target demographics are facing, with regards to like I have felt quite alienated in my work and quite isolated in my work. Sometimes I've definitely struggled with confidence. I've definitely struggled with accessing resources as somebody who doesn't come from more of a sort of traditional background where, you might have ready access to those resources. The other thing that I just really think that we're a bit of an outlier on potentially as an organization is just being really service minded with regards to like how do you treat your target audience? So we make sure that we want everybody who interfaces with Magnify Mentoring to come away with a really positive view of the organization. So stuff that we will do, is just to make sure, we are asking for feedback frequently. And I think in addition to the process of asking for feedback, you also want to be really clear when and what you've implemented. So I tend to provide like a summary email to the people who fill out our feedback forms and say, we have identified the following themes in the feedback that we received about this particular round. We are going to incorporate, let's say, XYZ, and we aren't going to incorporate these particular points. And here's the reason why not. And I think that sort of treating that instead as like feedback is something that you get and then you kind of, it's more of a kind of collaborative conversation. So the person who's giving you feedback keeps giving you feedback. So they feel, heard, and they feel like you've engaged with their points and you've introduced changes. And if you haven't introduced changes, you've sort of really let them know why that hasn't happened. I think another thing as well is we really place a lot of value upon being collaborative, constructive, and positive with our mentees, mentors, and with other organizations. Like we take a really problem orientated, solution orientated view, which is like, how can we concretely help? We are aware that there are issues that exist. What can we concretely do with our partner organizations to really help strengthen their work and to work together as a team? And I think that that is something that, has enabled us to maintain just really a positive reputation, but also just really good collaborative relationships with other organizations in the space. And that's really important for us with regards to actually best serving our mentees and getting them connected to as many resources as we possibly can. So yeah, other things are like being forgiving of yourself. Like it is really difficult. You're going to make some great calls, you're going to make some less good calls, and just being like forgiving with yourself so that you don't burn yourself out as a founder, I think is something that I have struggled with, but is something that is really important just for the longevity of the organization. And then most recently, I think the key things that I've learned is like being risk resilient. Like as an organization, you aren't going to necessarily be in a static operating environment. Things will change, funding situations will change, who your distribution networks may change. How do you respond to that and ensure that you're responding to that in a way that doesn't jeopardize the work that you're doing? And I think that recently, particularly during a more, tumultuous external time for the organization, has been really, really useful and is something that I will carry forward from the last couple of years, particularly. So, as a final point to address before we move into Magnify and getting involved with Magnify, and then also a Q&A, is what I found can work well with underrepresented groups. So, I think that sometimes there's a little bit of an aura of mystery here. And I actually think that like there are just really concrete things that you can do that is not just good for members from underrepresented groups, but is just really good for the members of your group or organization generally, or the spaces that you're in. So the first thing is just about being really nice to everybody. Ensuring that you're taking a couple of minutes to greet everybody, thank them for their participation, ask them how they're doing, making sure that they get as much contact time as other people in their group, making sure, that they have as much ability and or space in order to like express their views and their viewpoints. And I'm happy to answer any or questions about moderating. It's been something that I've done a bit of recently, and have sort of got a couple of tips and tricks for that. The other thing is bearing in mind who you're recommending. So what resources are you recommending? If you're recommending the same 5 people again and again, looking at LinkedIn, investigating different organizations, different speakers, and trying to just really pull forward people from a diversity of different fields, basically, I think is something that is huge, but also just people from a diversity of different backgrounds who are knowledgeable on these areas as well. Another thing is asking for feedback frequently. I touched on that earlier. Asking for recommendations of or of people who you might want to reach out to. And then, I think taking that feedback very seriously. And then I think a final thing that I've sort of learned more recently, and actually it's based off of a really brilliant Kelsey Piper article, which is about sort of safe spaces, is like being very explicit about like the rules of your space. Like if you are hosting a speaker who, has particularly controversial viewpoints on, for example, underrepresented groups, then let your members know, just say, this is what the norms of this discussion are going to be, this is how we're going to be having this discussion. And then they can make the decision to opt in or out of those discussions. And I think just being really upfront, really clear, and then also bearing in mind the trade-offs, with those actions, like you may have people who will self-select out of spaces. But I think just being really open and really honest about the trade-off judgments that you're making and, really honest with the members so they can make their own decisions, I think is something that is huge and really helpful. Awesome. So getting involved with Magnify, and I'll throw to a Q&A after this. So we're always looking for mentors. Like the mentors are just like the absolute foundation of the organization. We would be in deep trouble, if we didn't have our wonderful mentors. So I say here mid-senior level professionals. Honestly, I actually think that the people who I found to be best at mentoring, kind, warm, welcoming, genuinely invested in the progress of the mentee. Like it's aside from like being mid-senior level, like you do want somebody who has knowledge in a particular area, but you really do want somebody who's like able to, willing to, and invested in cultivating this kind of warm relationship with somebody else to like guide them and help them on their journey. And then, yeah, I'll throw mentee applications open probably in December or January. And I will advertise that. So, if you want to get in touch with me or go onto our website and express an interest, there's a form there underneath, join us. And yeah, we just love to hear from you. I'll leave the website open and yeah, I'll throw to a Q&A. But yeah, any and all questions, please ask them. And yeah, thank you so, so much for your time. I appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. That was a fantastic talk. I'll admit, I like stayed glued watching this because I think that you addressed so many great points. And I can tell because there are already a few questions in the chat. If anyone else watching this wants to contribute, you can go to the questions tab of the live interaction and swap card. I'll be reading the ones that have the most upvotes first. So if you don't have questions of your own, you can upvote some. I'll start with this one. Thank you so much for this amazing talk. Can I please ask, how do you find and recruit the 250 mentors and all the potential mentees? That's a lot.
Totally. Yeah, so it is a process is like the quick answer. So essentially what we do is we do a number of different things. So with the mentors, like it's a little bit of a like be aware of your target audience lesson at the very beginning, which is that I had a network in these spaces. I asked people who their networks were and then I approached them. And so that was how we got a like initial body of like I think it was 40 or 50 mentors, was like largely my relationships that I developed professionally, the people around me, and the people who they respected and thought would be really excellent mentors. But then from that point, we looked at different organizations, so which organizations, have members who are, doing amazing things, who are women, non-binary, and trans people at this point. So we reached out to them. I go through the swap card information for these conferences and for other conferences very closely. So if I see somebody who mentions, enjoying supporting people, who has a teaching background, who is a woman, non-binary, trans person, now a member from an underrepresented group, who's doing awesome work, I'll definitely pop them a message and ask them if they'd like to meet with me. So we do a lot of that, do a lot of proactive outreach. I now have for the first time a second member of staff who is now doing a lot of proactive outreach. So they recently went to I'm going to bodge the acronym, but I think it's AFAD, so the Asia Farmed Animal Day, and they met some amazing people there. So a lot of LinkedIn, a lot of personal networks, a lot of reaching out to people, a lot of organizational awareness and contacting them. Mentees and also just like really trying to treat your mentors really well. Like that was something that at the beginning I mentioned, and Alison, interrupt me at any point if I'm rambly. But I got in touch with like the feedback and followed up on the feedback and the people who had given the feedback around the first couple of rounds. And that was how I learned not to match by senior or by like kind of career path and instead to match by goals. Because it was something that some of our mentors were like, actually, yes, I do have this career, but I'm much more excited about providing this kind of support. So, yeah, feedback, getting referrals as well as another thing. So, you want a healthy number of referrals, which at the second we do have, which is wonderful. And then you also want to be being really proactive with reaching out to people, trying to extend your network as far as you possibly can into groups of people who are doing awesome things and who are taking an evidence-based approach to that. So yeah.
Wow. I imagine conferences such as this are a great opportunity for that.
Yeah. Yeah, like I have some like my EAGs are dick that like I will meet with many people, and yeah, it's a pleasure. Honestly, I'm just lucky to be able to do the work that I do. I get to learn about amazing people doing awesome things. So yeah, I'm very grateful to the people who help keep our program running through their time. So yeah, thank you.
This is a sort of logistical question. Is it possible to be both a mentor and a mentee?
Yes, it is. And we have a lot of people who return as well, which is great. I'm always happy to see that. So we have people who come in as mentees and then move to being mentors. We have people who are both mentors and mentees. So we increasingly do quite a lot of actually mid-senior level support. So we will connect people who are running organizations with one another. And I'm increasingly seeing quite a lot of people with those kinds of profiles as the organization, has sort of got a bit more established and has got its legs underneath it. Which is that we're able to sort of connect people who are mid-senior level in their career to other people who are mid-senior level in their career as well. So yeah, we have a lot of people who start as mentees, move into being mentors, a lot of people who are both mentors and mentees, and then some people who come back, like I've got a couple of people who have run through the program with different mentors, 3, 4 times, as their career advances, as their roles change, as their goals develop, so that's always cool to see as well.
Yeah, when you were talking about the mid to senior level, is that sort of like a peer mentorship, maybe, if they're at the same level?
Yeah, it certainly can be. Some of the time I'm sort of looking for, so say I get somebody who's applying, has just come through, for example, like sorry, I think they're called AIM now, but has just come through AIM's incubation program, then I might be trying to match them with somebody who is more experienced, who's, been a CEO for a while, been an executive director for a while, if they are looking at management, for example, then you're looking to connect them with a more experienced manager. If they're looking, for example, for confidence building, say, then I'm looking to connect them with somebody who's done that kind of work before. So yeah, I think this actually leads into kind of a point, which is I think, there's always a bit of a thing, which is when somebody is quite successful, you think that like, they can't possibly struggle with confidence, imposter syndrome or, and they absolutely do, and like connecting them with support, I do myself, um, we do quite a lot of that kind of work, helping people, who are, more mid-senior with things like that is, something that I'm really pleased to be able to do.
I feel like that's the perfect segue into the next question. Have you ever struggled with imposter syndrome, I guess, of your own when deciding to start Magnify?
Yeah, badly. And still do, like still do, 100% yes. Yeah, it is normal. And it is something that I have noticed is much more is seems to be much more prevalent among people from underrepresented groups, particularly. Um, I mean, like this is a bit a bit candid. Like the average outcome for somebody, from, like who's gone through some of the things that I have in my, personal life and, in my kind of background and, isn't necessarily, where I've kind of ended up. And so it's kind of one of those ones where I'm always a bit like, oh, like how have I, like, oh, I don't know, am I definitely good enough for this? Is this something that I can do? Like I was very worried about poisoning the well, so like starting Magnify off and doing a bad job, and then that people would think, that like doing support for underrepresented groups wasn't worth doing because like I'd fallen really flat on my face, like it's just like these kinds of thoughts, like I have them all the time. I still have them, definitely. So yeah, I think if there's somebody who is watching this who struggles with this, and I'm sure there is, other than myself, things that I have found really, or piece of advice that I found quite useful, like don't say no to yourself before other people can say no. Because you don't know they're going to say no. Like put in the resume, put in the CV, put in the cover letter, put yourself forward, you know, because a lot of the time, you can be really positively surprised by what you can achieve. Um, and talk to people who have similar issues. Like it's much more common than I think people realize. So yeah, don't say no to yourself before other people can, because they may not say no at all. And yeah, just like I think realizing, that this is something that affects a lot of people
Maybe that's just where we
and that
do
we're in it together.
the shameless plug for like, oh, that's why Magnify Mentoring exists to help with that. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
certainly a key focus.
How do you create a warm and supportive community?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple of different concrete things that we do. That I think that, I really place a really heavy emphasis on. So I think the first thing that I do is that we have a lot of mentors. Um, I try and chat with everybody who comes on as a mentor, and I take feedback about the mentors really seriously. So if I have feedback about a mentor that, isn't like suggests that maybe, I shouldn't rematch them, then I really politely just thank them very much for their time, and then I might not rematch them. And I think sort of making sure that, the people who you are highlighting, have these values, so are really warm, are really welcoming, really care about junior people and supporting them, really care about each other, and, have a team mindset. It's like we are in this together. These problems are big. Some of them are very scary, quite frankly. Like we're here on the same, terra surface, if you will, how can we make life better for each other? So really sort of getting people who, have these values and these commitments, and working with people who have these values and commitments, getting mentors, taking the feedback from mentors about mentees, from mentees about mentors very seriously. I think that that is something. The other thing that I really do try and do is just to like take I think that we are more of an outlier on this. Take a bit more of a service-minded attitude to staff, actually. So broadly, I am very careful, with regards to like making sure that I treat every single mentee interaction, every single interaction, and every stakeholder interaction really carefully. So just like thank them for their time, respond to their inquiries, respond to their feedback, be really proactive in reaching out and asking, how we can best be supportive, how we can make the relationship and the pairing a success. And then a large degree of like throwing different pairings at each other, like throwing different communities at one another, I think is something that I really value and I'm really excited about. Like we're about to start a peer-peer program where we're going to introduce our mentees into small groups and give them guidance sheets for that. So you're really looking at how you can create, more relationships, upon like shared interests, sometimes regionally as well. Like we've had quite a lot of success with helping different regional efforts kick off, just because we've got a bit of a bird's eye view over the field, so we can see, well, we've got these 5 mentees in um say Kenya, who are really interested in long-termism and really interested in these areas, how can we connect them with each other, because they may not know each other exist, and we have this database where we know that they do. So yeah, really sort of trying to kind of build the community that way, and then just being really conscious that everybody who, comes to us as a mentor or a mentee, leaves with an absolute minimum a neutral impression, and very ideally a positive one.
That's really impressive that these factors are important to you because I think it does make a difference, especially when you're dealing with underrepresented communities. So we'll
Yeah,
move
I
on
would
to
actually add as well, like, sorry to interrupt, just sort of trying to be really open about my own stuff as well has been quite useful. Like, I think it's one of those ones where people presume that, like, you know, presume that sort of once you get to like mid senior, once you hit a certain age, all of your issues will magically disappear, and you'll have all of the answers and excel all of the time, and everything's always great and work's always really easy, and I'm always maximally productive and effective, and and that is just not true. And I think just trying to be really open so people feel less alone is something that I've found to be useful, but a bit vulnerable occasionally.
What are some examples of mistakes that could be made if you don't truly know your audience?
Yeah, let me have a little bit of a think and see if I can think of any that I have made recently. I think that a lot of the time you are looking at, yeah, so here's a really good one, I think. So say for example, you're providing recommendations, for places to go and work, and all of your organizations are geographically concentrated, but you're also saying, that we are aiming to provide support for people from like low to middle income countries. Like there may be visa restrictions there, for example, is something that we found, like being yeah, that's one. And then just like unpaid internships, so sort of a presumption that people can take unpaid internships, a presumption that people can, take really risky career moves. Um, I think is something like that sometimes permeates into discussions and into, like we've got this particular hire, we know that they're committed because, they moved to X place, on a whim in order to take a job that, was more junior in the organization. We know that they're really committed to what we do. And that certainly is true of that individual. They are really committed, and but also there's a lot at play there as to why some people can't take those opportunities. I've turned down opportunities when I was younger because I couldn't afford to do them. And it wasn't for a lack of wanting. I really wanted to do these things, but I couldn't, because I didn't have the financial resources. And so I think the thing I've tried to really do is like be a bit more aware of the context within which you're operating. So like recently, for example, we sort of created much more of a comprehensive understanding of, what organizations exist regionally, what organizations exist locally, how can we direct people to fantastic organizations that, are doing evidence-based work, how can we connect people with visa support, how can we connect people with grant support, like honestly, something that I've been really blown away by, or a couple of programs I've been really blown away by, are the open philanthropy projects. So I'm not sure if I'm meant to call them project or fund. Yeah, I think it's Open Philanthropy Project. Yeah, so basically they gave early career incubation funding, and that was huge for some of my mentees because they wouldn't have been able to afford to do, ex PhD in like microbiology, and because they were going into this particular area, and they'd got this funding, they were able to do that. Um, and then another program was actually the Global Catastrophic Risk Initiative, did a mentorship program for people who didn't have like traditional career CV markers. And so it was giving them experience, giving them exposure, and helping them to like have that mark on their CV, for this kind of work. And I've just seen that really positively impact a number of our mentees. Because often you can't see somebody's merit from their CV. There's a lot of stuff going on below the surface with regards to restrictions, particularly for everybody, but also for people from underrepresented groups, particularly. So yeah, those are some examples. Really trying to tailor, your advice and just give, give accurate advice, so like if that there are regional organizations to recommend them as well, so yeah, I think those are some examples of sometimes I see it go a little bit wrong. And we really try to like not do that, basically, to really try and understand and really try and like connect people with a diversity of different resources.
Great. So we have a handful of other questions. I'm going to try to get through them. If not, they'll have to be, you'll have to take them to office hours. So we have
Yeah,
two that
please,
are,
happy to.
okay. So there are two that are somewhat related. The first one is,
Mhm.
are there any career areas that have high demand and have been difficult to find mentors or mentees with? And then the second one is, are there any goals that are harder or easier to match? And where do you have the greatest need? So the first one is sort of like career areas, and then the second one is goals.
Yeah, so unfortunately, due to the universe that we currently exist in, STEM, like science, technology, like these areas. And I think it's just, we're dealing with barriers upstream, so we see less mid to senior level women in STEM. And it's improving greatly, but yeah, like if you're looking for the mentors in those areas, that's sometimes been a little bit harder. There are certain areas that have boomed recently, for example, artificial intelligence and governance, for example. So we find like a percentage of our mentors are much busier and there's more demand. So it's this very interesting combination between, which is great and it speaks really, really well for what the world could and will hopefully look like into the future, touch wood, but we've got a lot of more junior people who are interested in pursuing STEM orientated careers, and we have a bit of a gap for people who are in STEM orientated careers who are mid to senior professionals already. So that would be an example of an area that I find it a little bit hard to get mentors in. And so, yeah, if you have a STEM background and you are kind, warm, welcoming, and interested in investing in junior people, definitely hit me up because, yeah, certainly that's an area where we could do with more people. Mentees tends to be much easier. I think we've we've just been really lucky in that the general ethos around the organization has continued to be just really positive, in sort of more public dialogue. And so we get many mentee applications. I worry a bit about distribution networks sometimes. Am I maximally reaching outside of networks that would have already been reached otherwise? What's our counterfactual, if you will, there? So I do fret a bit about that sometimes. And take efforts to make sure that we're getting in touch with like communities who share evidence as a evidence scale, impactfulness, doing good, as core values. But yeah, the mentees is much less tricky, and STEM mid senior is harder for mentors, largely because of the barriers up the pipeline, unfortunately. But there's hope. I'm seeing a lot of people coming through now, which is great, and they're encouraging for me and the world, I think. Goals, hard goals. Um, I think sometimes hard goals look like, I think that there's like a thing that sometimes people do when they first get involved in these fields, which is that they apply for the same 10, 15 organizations and they don't realize, and I think this is something that I really cleanly like to communicate to you guys if you're job seeking. Some of these organizations get like 1,000 applications per junior position. You should still apply, definitely put yourself forward for that, but the data point should be different if you don't get it, or if you get to a later stage of the application process and then don't get the role, which is like congratulations for getting to the, because that was a really competitive role. So when I get job seekers, encouraging them to take a broader view and then also to view rejection, not as like, I really am interested in this field. There's nowhere I can be useful, and getting kind of fairly, dejected. Like job seeking is terrible sometimes, like I am not, but getting dejected and feeling really sad, that like, oh, the community and the ideas that I wanted to do and they're rejecting me. You're like, no, like really be aware that like junior roles, highly, highly, highly competitive. So I think keeping people motivated, keeping people feeling, that their skills are valuable, their experience is valuable, there is absolutely a place for them, but then also encouraging them to look broadly, we are better. I think the world is better, where evidence is incorporated in every single branch of everything that we are doing, and I think that like this opens up the field of options for people who are interested in evidence-based work and doing good in the world, so not taking too much of a narrow approach, I think, is something that is huge. Yeah.
We have 2 minutes left. So here's a quick question. What is the intake of mentees you take on in comparison to the number of applications?
Yeah. So I still controversially, I have chats with most people who apply. I probably shouldn't say this because this will mean that I will have to do many chats into the future, which I actually quite enjoy. But I do try and talk, at least, give it resources and guidance and advice to most of the people who apply to the program. I just really, talent identification is much harder than people sometimes say that it is. Like I miss stuff, like definitely when I'm skimming through applications, and I'm that well, I don't really skim. I do an initial skim and then I do a pretty vigorous like into them to try and work out, like who I should be matching them with, which is why our process takes quite a while at the second to match people, which is something that I'm going to try and nail a bit more over the coming year, increase that sort of turnover time. But yeah, we tend to get about, I think it's about 150, and then we'll take on about 100. But I will try and provide resources for anybody who is like, sometimes you get people who haven't put, very much into the, application, or, I won't necessarily touch base with them, but, I will try and give everybody resources or try and connect people with things that can be useful for them. Yeah, so broadly, we try and be a bit of an open door, to be honest, to the maximum ability that we can. Yeah.
Great. Well, we are at time. I'm sorry. There were still like 4 other
Thank
questions.
you.
So if anyone wants, you can go to Swapcard and find Kathryn's office hours to continue to talk with her. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Alison. That was awesome. And thank you so much, everybody, for taking the time to attend. It was lovely to see you all. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful day.